Hey all, here OS Reviews. Today we're taking a closer look at the Microsoft Surface Laptop 2 in 2023. This laptop debuted back in late 2018, making it now roughly 4 years old. But for better or for worse, the design still looks relatively recent just because Microsoft hasn't really refreshed the look of their Surface laptops. Even now up to the 5th generation, it still has a similar aesthetic. One of the reasons why you may want to consider one would be pricing. They can now be found for as low as $150 when shopping around, putting it into the budget territory, especially when compared to the original MRSP of $1,000 for the base model and can be configured up to 2.5K for the fully spec'd i7 16 gigs of RAM version. That is a similar price category, in fact, as what Apple charges for their MacBooks, and in a way, you can say that the Surface products are like the MacBooks, but of the Windows world in terms of their fit and finish. You're paying a bit more of a premium there for the build, the product coming directly from Microsoft. I will also point out that you can find the Microsoft Surface Laptop 3 right now for around $300 to $350. So we are talking about roughly twice the price of the Surface Laptop 2. It's actually about the same amount of money for the original Surface laptop, which has much inferior specs in terms of the CPU and horsepower. So the 2 is one of the better values there if your budget, again, doesn't stretch over $200. So anyways, taking a closer look at the hardware here, like all Surface laptops, it has a boxy 3:2 aspect ratio display. This is similar to an iPad, for instance, and although not quite as wide if you're watching videos, it makes it nice for doing things like web browsing. You don't have to scroll up and down quite as much. And here's how it stacks up against a 12-inch laptop, something like the MacBook 12-inch. You can tell it's definitely going to be a little bit wider as well as taller. So do expect something just a little bit larger compared to some of the other popular Ultrabooks on the market, but still not too bad. Weighs in at a little under 2.8 pounds for the i5 version, which is also easy enough to carry with you when on the go. It is relatively slim, and it does look very sleek and stealth-like, although the black version also attracts fingerprints relatively easily. So you can also pick between platinum silver, burgundy red, and also a cobalt blue color. Now on the side of the unit, you also find some embedded antenna bands. Since there are no plastic components on the laptop, even the hinge here is made out of a piece of metal, and there's also the Surface connector for the charger. It's a magnetic reversible charger similar to MagSafe. It's pretty handy, although it's also a point of critique in that the Surface Laptop 2, just like the first gen, doesn't have a standard Type-C port. It wasn't until the later generations until they had Thunderbolt support. On the other side of the unit, you did have access to a full-size Type-A USB port, which is good. You can plug in thumb drives. At least it doesn't kill that, unlike some of the other Ultrabooks on the market. And there is also a mini display port that supports up to 4K output. There is at least a 3.5mm headphone jack, which is nice to see, and a pretty iconic overall design from Microsoft, which is this trapezoid kind of tapered look with these pretty sharp corners. And flipping it around, you'll be greeted to soft touch rubber feet, along with the top hinge also houses the fans. So this is not a passively cooled laptop. There is a fan that will kick in when it's doing more processor intensive applications like video editing, but in normal usage it actually is relatively cool. But one of the other downsides of the Surface laptop, first gen and the second gen, is the repairability. Unfortunately, the RAM is soldered on, and it's impossible to easily pop it open to switch out something like the battery even. The only way to access that, in fact, is ripping open the Alcantara fabric on the keyboard deck portion. The back doesn't physically pop out. And as a result, this thing infamously received a 0 on iFixit in terms of the repairability score. And it's something that Microsoft thankfully have addressed, starting with the Surface Laptop 3 and newer, making it much easier to swap out parts. And I think that's part of the reason why the price has also degraded at a pretty fast rate compared to many of its contemporary premium Ultrabooks from the 2018-2019 timeframe. And you're able to open up the lid with just one hand, so all of those tiny details are handled nicely. The laptop does have Windows Hello, so you can see a little bit of that flashing infrared light that will scan your face, and within less than a second it will unlock into the Windows desktop. So super fast, and I find it to be even more convenient than fingerprint authentication. That is one of the, I think, better selling points of this laptop even to its day. Moving into the keyboard situation, We can see that it's covered in a layer of fabric, which Microsoft calls Alcantara. It's similar to their type covers found on regular tablet 2-in-1 surfaces. So the benefit here is it's very soft, and as you're typing with it, it makes it easier on your wrist. In fact, the entire taper design, which gets a little bit slimmer at the front, it's very ergonomic, especially in colder environments. It just feels more inviting and more premium to the touch. The downside, of course, is like any fabric material, it is inevitably harder to clean compared to regular aluminum or plastic. And so starting with, again, the Surface Laptop 3 and newer, there were options to pick just a bare metal version if you didn't want to mess with the Alcantara, although you can still choose it if you prefer. So that's also one of the things where I think, again, Microsoft should have really made this maybe a skin or some type of detachable situation with magnets that would make it easier to wash and replace. And on this black version, at least, it doesn't look too bad, although it's where the platinum silver color is much easier to stain. So if you're looking at used units, I would advise against the silver one if you're looking for one that just looks a little bit newer. With that being said, the overall keyboard and trackpad are excellent, like most Surface products. It has plenty of travel and feedback and much superior to the same generation butterfly switches found on MacBooks of the same era, which shine in the dark under all the keys. And finally, that trackpad is also made out of glass, like on premium laptops, and just feels super smooth and responsive to use. And it does click down with a satisfying thump as well, which isn't too loud in my opinion. Another difference compared to MacBooks, for instance, would be it is fully touch sensitive and supports 10 fingers for multi-touch like a regular kickstand enabled Surface. With that being said, this is a regular laptop in terms of form factor, so you can't really detach the screen, although it is very slim. And in terms of how far back it goes, this is kind of the maximum angle that you see here. With that being said, it is a very stable hinge and never really wobbles even as you're touching the screen, which is good. It also supports the Intrig-based active stylus or Surface Pen. That's a little bit strange since you aren't really using this for graphic art due to the more limited positions of the display. But if you are trying to sign a document or annotate something very quickly, it can be convenient. And since it is an active stylus, it is at least super precise if you are doing just a little bit of doodling here and there, which again also has that pressure sensitivity support. So if you're pressing harder, you'll see a thicker line versus lighter, you'll see a lighter line as well. Although the laptop came with Windows 10 out of the box, it can be officially upgraded to Windows 11. General system navigation remains relatively smooth and responsive. With that being said, some of the extra animations and widgets on Windows 11 are just a little bit more power intensive compared to Windows 10, but still not bad at all as you're zipping around the UI. Either sticking with the factory default, which is recommended on relatively power saving, you can also go into a better performance and best performance modes if desired, which will both crank up the processor speed as well as the brightness of the screen, but also consume more power. Which, speaking of, on a used model, it will usually get you around 5 to 7 hours of battery on a full charge. Certainly not bad, but do keep in mind that batteries will degrade over time. And in terms of charging speed, it's also not necessarily the fastest with the Microsoft type charger, taking upwards of 4 hours, in fact, to completely replenish the cell. You can sometimes stretch longer, getting upwards of, say, 8 to 10 hours of just very light web browsing and reading, although that is also not really pressing the machine too hard. Now, we do have the 256GB version of this laptop, and it's the i5 model as well, which you can see after the Windows 11 installation. You get around 200GB free for you to install other applications. Again, the SSD is not going to be replaceable, so do make sure you pick up the model that you need ahead of time. Although synthetic benchmarks aren't everything, it will give you a rough idea of where this thing sits. So on Passmark, this i5-8250U, clocked at 1.6 GHz, reaches about 5,898, so just a little bit shy of 6,000, which is actually not a shabby score at all. And this is a quad-core processor with 8 threads. Now, just as reference, the original Surface Laptop 1, which again has a similar price point at the moment and almost an identical design from afar, uses the i5-7200U, and it has a much weaker 3,396 Passmark score. We're going from a dual-core processor on the original Surface Laptop to a quad-core processor, which is why we have a noticeable jump in performance, a little bit shy of almost 2 times higher, which is why Personally, I wouldn't really recommend the original Surface laptop anymore, especially now you can find it at a similar price point. It just makes more sense to go for this newer unit. And if you're curious, the Surface Laptop 3 further bumps that up to an i5 1035G7, has a pass mark score of a little over 8,000. So we're getting another bump there, which is going to be significant, but it's still going to be a quad-core processor. And Wi-Fi reception remains quite fast as well. I was consistently getting almost full bars, even when I'm a little bit further away from the router. You can also tell here that web browsing still remains a very fluid and fast experiences. Web pages, even complex ones, are quick to load and render. Scrolling also feels smooth. Plus, you can use the touchscreen again if you prefer. So it remains a very comfortable experience for reading. You can also hear that in terms of web browsing alone, you're not going to be driving up the active fans on here either. So even though we're on a higher performance mode, it's whisper quiet. Now moving into a quick video playback as well as a sound test of what the speakers are like next. We're going to full screen, and I'm playing this back, by the way, at full HD 1080p resolution. Some takeaways here being that we were only about 50% volume there, and it was already filling up this smaller room without too many issues. It is generally one of the better sounding speakers on a laptop that you'll find for under 14 inches. And what's interesting here is that Microsoft tucked the speakers underneath the keyboard, which doesn't seem very intuitive, but surprisingly there's a lot of depth here, and even has a bit of bass and kick to it, which you don't usually find on a thin ultra portable. And again, having a standard headphone jack plus Bluetooth 5.0, you can always connect to external peripherals if needed. Video playback, as you can tell, is also handled beautifully by the processor, as well as the, again, Wi-Fi antennas, having 0 drop frames here in full HD. In fact, switching to 4K here and tapping on resume, you can tell it still remains pretty smooth, though you may find occasionally 1 or 2 drop frames on a longer video, but still generally very acceptable buffering speeds, quick to load, and a pretty smooth video playback experience. So definitely can handle these tasks still without too many issues. As for document editing work, even with offline files on Excel, PowerPoint, and Word, no issues here either. When it comes to video editing and gaming though, it's relatively weak. We have the integrated Intel Graphics UHD 620 chip, so you're not going to be doing anything too demanding. Even back in its day, there were more powerful units from Razer if you really wanted to game, and also keep in mind the Surface Laptop 3, there are Ryzen powered models available as well, which has a more powerful GPU too. So for simple tasks, like if you're trying to stitch together some clips in full HD, it can still be handled. The fan will kick on a bit, but in my testing, about a 5-minute clip was able to be exported in around equally 5 minutes or so. But if you're trying to get into 4K or higher, it's just going to take a lot longer and just use up more power as well, unless you have this thing plugged in. And so that theme prevails when it comes to light gaming as well. Titles like CSGO, as well as older style games and emulators play on here just fine. But if you're looking into AAA titles which are newer, like Cyberpunk, it's just not going to be a good experience. Plus, again, the limited memory anyways, unless you're picking up one of the higher spec versions to begin with. Although, you can always try streaming, so services like Microsoft's xCloud as well as Amazon's Luna, you'll be able to stream games on more powerful hardware as long as you have a reliable internet connection, can generally perform quite well, especially with a pretty vibrant looking panel that looks good, although again the boxy shape does mean you get a little bit of a letterboxing effect at the top and bottom for multimedia consumption. So that is more or less it as far as our revisited review of the Microsoft Surface Laptop 2. And overall it's still a pretty capable laptop, especially for the ultra budget price that you can find it at. The display is beautiful, very good for multitasking and productivity. We have that unique touchscreen as well as stylus support, an excellent keyboard that is one of the best on any laptop even to this date. There's still plenty of power here for just lighter computing tasks like web browsing as well as multimedia entertainment and a bit of office work. If that's all you need, then I think the Surface Laptop 2 is really still a very good choice. You can also find something like a Surface Pro 4 or 5 at a similar price point that may have similar power as as well in more of a tablet convertible form factor that Microsoft is better known for, especially under the Surface line. But the laptop is really for those that want a more conventional form factor that has better quote-unquote lapability in the sense that it just rests better when you are typing on your lap. You can check out additional details if you're interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been a revisited look at the Surface Laptop 2